Now we're moving on to the cerebrum. The function of the cerebrum is rather complicated, as you can imagine. It controls all of our conscious thoughts and our intellectual functions. It's involved with things like our ability to make judgments and our imagination. But then it's involved with things like controlling our muscles and perceiving sensory information. In terms of its structure, the cerebrum has two hemispheres that are, for the most part, separated. They are connected through things like the white matter connections, like the corpus callosum. But for the most part, they are pretty separate. The cerebrum has several different lobes. The bumps all over the cerebrum are called gyri, gyrus for singular. And the little valleys where the bumps go down, those are called sulci or sulcus for singular. A really large sulcus is called a fissure. And the cerebrum has an outer layer and an inner layer. The outer layer is called the cerebral cortex, and that's where all the fun is. And then deeper to that is the inner layer called the cerebral medulla. So the cerebral medulla contains the white matter of the cerebrum. So this is found deep to the cerebral cortex. And it's white because, like other forms of white matter, it contains mostly myelinated axons. So these axons are sending signals from one part of the brain to another. Like I just mentioned earlier, the corpus callosum is an example. So we said that the two hemispheres of the cerebrum are for the most part separated, but things like the corpus callosum do connect them. And the corpus callosum is important because it allows communication from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. So here is a view of the corpus callosum, right, in a sagittal section. But kind of to give you a more three-dimensional view of the corpus callosum, here we're looking at an anterior view of the brain, and here you can very nicely see how the corpus callosum can communicate between the right and the left halves of the cerebral hemisphere. All right, most of the action that was happening in the cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is superficial to the cerebral medulla, so this is the outer layer of the brain, right? And it contains gray matter. In this picture here, we're looking at a brain, and you can very clearly see the darker outer layer, the cortex, that is the gray matter right here, and then the white matter would be the cerebral medulla. The gray matter is gray because it contains cell bodies which are darker and denser than axons. There might be some unmyelinated axons in here. The white matter was white because it contained a lot of fat around the outside of the axons, and fats tend to be white. So the cerebral cortex has different layers to it. In humans, we have more layers in our cerebral cortex than other animals, and that's one of the things that contributes to the human intelligence. Also, the cerebral cortex in humans has many more folds, so we have more gyri and sulci than other animals do. Basically, we have more surface area for processing information and intellectual thoughts and functions. What I think is one of the really amazing things about the cerebral cortex is the fact that the neurons that make their way to the cerebral cortex make their way to the right place. During embryonic development, what happens is our neurons crawl all the way to the surface of the cerebral cortex. But then once they hit the surface there, they crawl back to the right part of the cortex where they need to be and then stop, which sounds really weird because the neuron came like this and went right past where it was supposed to be, went all the way to the surface and came back again. And that's how most of the neurons get into the correct location in the cerebral cortex. And I find it absolutely amazing that our neurons make their way to the right places most of the time, and most of the time everything works out just fine. We have the cerebral cortex pretty well mapped. We know which areas of the cerebral cortex are involved with what. Right? Like for instance in the woman, apparently there's a large area for love as compared to sex for the man. Just joking. All right, so I want to talk about the functions of the cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is involved with a lot of different functions. It's involved with our ability to perceive sensory information and make sense of that information. It's involved with sending out motor commands to control our muscles. It's involved with emotions and language. Right? So it helps us to not only understand language, but produce language. It's involved with sleep, memory, and cognition. So we'll first talk about how the cerebral cortex is involved with senses. There are two main groups of senses in the human body: special senses and general senses. Special senses are limited to the head and they employ complex organs. They include gustation, which is taste, olfaction, which is smell, vision, hearing, and balance. Touch is not considered a special sense. So I know K through 12 education teaches children that touch is a special sense, but from a human from a human anatomy and physiology perspective, touch is not considered to be a special sense. Touch would fall into the next category, which are general senses. General senses, it would be nice if we could just call them general senses, but there's a lot of different names for general senses. Somasthetic, somatosensory, and somatic are a couple examples. Som means body and aesthetic means to sense. So basically, these are the senses that are of most of our body. So things like touch you can feel all over your body, and temperature you can detect all over your body, and pain you can detect all over your body. So I want to take a look at how the cerebral cortex is involved with sensation. Sensation is perceived in a two-step process within the cerebral cortex. It involves two different areas of the cortex, something called the primary cortex and then something called an association area. The job of the primary cortex is to initially receive the sensory information that's coming into the brain. So when information hits a primary cortex, we become aware of the sensation. So we know we're feeling something, but we don't know what it is that we're feeling. From there, the information will be sent to the nearby association area of the cortex. When the information hits the association area, that's when we make cognitive sense of the information. That's when we go, aha, I know what I'm feeling blank. Like for example, so let's take for example a pebble in your shoe. Okay, so a pebble gets into your shoe, it's going to activate pain receptors in your skin. Those signals will be sent up a nerve to your spinal cord, up your spinal cord, through your brainstem to your thalamus. And remember, your thalamus has the job of filtering incoming sensory information. This sounds like a pretty important thing, so the thalamus sends the information on to the cerebral cortex. The first place the thalamus is going to send the information to is going to be a primary area of the cortex, where you'll become aware that there is something uncomfortable on the bottom of your foot. From there, the information will be sent to a nearby association area where you go, aha, there must be a pebble in my shoe. You make cognitive sense of the information. So let's first take a look at how the cerebral cortex is involved with general senses. The primary cortex that's involved with general senses is called the primary somasthetic cortex. The primary somasthetic cortex is located right here. This is a location called the postcentral gyrus. This little area right here is called the central sulcus. This dip right here is the central sulcus. In front of the sulcus is the precentral gyrus, and behind the sulcus is the postcentral gyrus. So the primary somasthetic cortex is located in the postcentral gyrus, and when any kind of general sensory information is sent to the cortex, it goes here first. From the primary somasthetic cortex, it will then be sent over here to this nearby association area called the somasthetic association area, a rather large area of the brain. This little picture is something called a sensory homunculus, and a homunculus takes a part of the brain and then maps the body to it. So what we're looking at here is a sensory homunculus of the postcentral gyrus. So the dark purple here, right, that would be this area here. So this is the postcentral gyrus of the cerebral cortex. Right? The size of the body part associated with that part of the brain gives us some information about how sensitive we are to feeling general sensory information from that particular body part. For example, according to this map, you can perceive a lot more general sensory information at your tongue than you can from your elbow. Right? Your lips are much more sensitive than your wrist, kind of thing. So now I want to look at how the cerebral cortex is involved with special senses. So again, there's a two-step process involving a primary cortex and an association area. But we won't be using the somaesthetic cortex or the somaesthetic association area here. Remember, somaesthetic means general senses. And now we're moving on to special senses. So we're going to use primary sensory cortices here that are named for the particular special sense. And then we'll use association areas here that are also named for the special sense. But the pattern's going to be the same. The information will be processed through the thalamus and then sent to the primary cortex, where we become aware of the sensation, and then it will be sent to the association area, where we make cognitive sense of it. For example, when you see something with your eye, the information is first sent to the primary visual cortex, where you become aware that you are seeing something. You're seeing light, you're seeing a pattern to the light, but you don't know what it is yet. The information needs to be sent next to this green area here, which is the visual association area. Once the information hits this green area, you can make cognitive sense of it and say, aha, there's a bird flying at my head and I should probably duck, kind of thing. Another example, this darker orange area right here is our primary auditory cortex, which first receives our hearing information at the cortex. And that's when we become aware that we're hearing something, but we don't know what it is that we're hearing until the information is sent over here to the auditory association area. All right, so let's take a look at a couple pathways to sensation. So I kind of already went over this, but I think it's worth it to go over it again. I want to look at how we can feel a pebble in our shoe. Well, first, a sensory receptor in the foot is activated. That sends a signal through a spinal nerve to the spinal cord. It goes through the spinal cord up to the brainstem, through the brainstem to the thalamus. The thalamus then will send the information on to the primary somaesthetic cortex, right? Because this is not a special sense, so we're using the somaesthetic cortex. And then the information is sent to the somaesthetic association area. And that's when we are able to make cognitive sense of the fact that this bumpy thing in the bottom of our foot is a pebble in our shoe, and we should probably take our shoe off to fix it. But now, here's a pathway that we didn't talk about, tasting cake, right? That's always a fun thing to do. So the first thing that happens is we put the cake in our mouth and we activate gustatory receptors on our tongue. A signal is then sent through a cranial nerve to the brainstem, through the brainstem to the thalamus. This is very, very, very important information, so the thalamus must send it on to the primary gustatory cortex, where you become aware that you are tasting something. But then the information is sent to the gustatory association area, where you realize that you are tasting delicious cake and you really need to get some more of that delicious cake. Now we're going to take a look at motor control, how the cerebral cortex is involved with motor control. With sensory perception that we just talked about, sensory perception ended at the cerebral cortex. But with motor control, we're going to begin the controlling of our muscles. We're going to begin that at the cerebral cortex. Just like with sensory information processing at the cortex, we will go through a two-step process here for motor control. And we're going to use a primary cortex and an association area. But we do it in reverse. We're going to use the association area first and then the primary cortex. So there's a two-step process to motor control. The motor association area of the brain is where we plan out our motor commands. When you go, aha, I think I want to wave my hands in the air like I just don't care. Okay, so you begin that planning in the motor association area. From there, the information is sent to the primary From there, the information is sent to the primary motor cortex, which is in the precentral gyrus. I'm going to start all over again. So again, this is a two-step process through the cortex. So we start off the planning of a motor command at the motor association area, which is located in the frontal lobe of the cerebral cortex. So this is where we decide and make the plan to move a muscle. So if you decide you want to throw your hands in the air like you just don't care, that plan starts here in the motor association area. From there, the information will be sent to the primary motor cortex at the precentral gyrus. And from there, the signal will be sent down to other parts of the brain and then eventually out to the muscle. Now there's many brain structures that are going to be involved with fine-tuning a motor signal before it's actually sent out to the muscle. For example, the brainstem could be involved, the cerebellum, which of course is highly involved with precision and control of muscles, would likely be involved too. So in light blue, we see the motor association area where motor signals start. This is when we plan out a motor command. From there, the information is sent to the precentral gyrus, our primary motor cortex, and then it will be sent to other brain areas such as the cerebellum. I know it says sensation up here, but it should be motor. We looked at a sensory homunculus earlier. This is a motor homunculus. Right, so we're looking at the precentral gyrus. So this is the mapping of the precentral gyrus. Right? The larger the body part, the more control we have over the body part. For instance, we have much more fine control over our fingers than we do our hips. Apparently a lot of control of our tongue. So I taught you how to feel a pebble in your shoe, and I taught you how to taste cake, so let's eat some soup now. Right? The idea to move muscles to eat soup begins in the motor association area of the cerebral cortex. From there, the information is sent to the primary motor cortex. After the primary motor cortex, the signal is sent to other brain areas like your brainstem and cerebellum. Then the information will be sent down your spinal cord, to a spinal nerve, to your biceps brachii muscle. Your biceps brachii muscle will flex, helping you to bring your spoon towards your mouth so you can eat soup.